Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a LEED Fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Everybody, welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast, and Happy New Year as we're here in January. We've got a special guest here today with me, not just a LEED expert and a green building expert. We've known each other for several years when she was at the U.S. Green Building Council and then went over and really focused on ARC and building performance. But I can't wait to hear more of what Gautami Palanki is up to. So Gautami, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Hi. Thank you for having me, Charlie.
Well, you already are bringing good energy to this podcast. This is where I get to interview a green building professional somewhere in the world and kind of hear your story. How'd you get to what you're doing, the successes, the challenges, and I can't wait to hear more of your story. So take us back, though. So where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
I am from a wonderful city called Hyderabad. It's in the south of India. And I feel very proud coming from the city because it's a historic city. You have an old city and a new city. So growing up, you could see, how architecture really defines the space you're in. So yes, I'm from Hyderabad, India.
And it seems like you had an eye for architecture. That might come up in a little bit. So yeah, I mean, did you know you wanted to go to school there? Tell us a little bit about your schooling.
Sure. So yes, my entire young life, I've grown up in Hyderabad. Right from kindergarten all the way through architecture school. So it's the city I live and breathe. Even though I live in Washington, D.C. now, my heart is still in Hyderabad.
It's amazing. And I understand you got an undergraduate degree in architecture. So did you have family members in buildings and architecture, or you just, for some reason, wanted to get into that? How'd you get into architecture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't thought about it that much, but no, I did not have family in the real estate world or industry. I think right from a young child, I was very interested in art. It was definitely something I did a lot of, whether it was amateur, but dabbling in different artistic media and classical dance forms, learning about textiles. Just, I think the historical, cultural relevance of everyday life was very exciting to me. And I think that's what led to the intersection of science and art being architecture. I'd like to think that was a very well thought out process, but it wasn't. I think it just sounded very exciting and something I wanted to explore more.
It sounds like you had some self-awareness at a young age. You pursued some of your hobbies and passions and kind of knew what you liked. So that's really cool. And so did you have any kind of mentors early in your career or growing up?
I think it was an exposure and the desire to learn more, I would say, than one singular person. So I think, for example, my parents always encouraged us to seek new adventures and explore before saying no. And so, as a child, I was one of those kids who did classical dance and was sprinting on my school athletic team. Oh, wow. And then everything in between. So I think this idea of exploration is probably, quote unquote, the mentor that helped me along the way. And I think when I was looking to do something new, I definitely wanted to engage in a conversation with someone else who was doing that too. So maybe there was more than one mentor. I think that's how I would think about it.
That's great. And it sounds like you had very encouraging parents. Go explore. So let's talk next about what brought you to the United States, and then we'll get to green buildings in a minute. So what brought you to come to the U.S.?
Sure. So when I was in architecture school, a lot of my courses and studio work focused on vernacular, bioclimatic architecture. And so, growing up in India, you're so influenced by the history of architecture. It's everywhere, like you walk by a building and it could be 200 years old. And so I I think what I wanted to explore was, okay, given the history of architecture, how do we incorporate what's today, what's current, what's the future? And so this idea of learning more about current technologies and innovation, I wanted to pursue a master's degree. And so that's what brought me to Pittsburgh, actually, from Hyderabad. And that's where I went to grad school.
Okay. Carnegie Mellon. Was Vivian Lofness there at the time? Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Such a lovely person and just so inspirational. And, no matter how much experience you have, like when you're so approachable and like kids from different parts of the world can come and talk to you, that's definitely someone I've looked up to for a long time.
She was on the podcast, a couple of years ago. So for those listening, and maybe for you, if you haven't heard it, go back and listen to Vivian's podcast. Very inspiring. So sustainability, you've been doing green buildings a long time. I've been doing green buildings a long time. How did you know you wanted to get into sustainability? Did you have an aha moment, or how did you know this is what you're going to do?
I will admit I did not know the word, but I knew it was the context I wanted to be in. So as I was mentioning in undergrad, a lot of my studio work and research was around bioclimatic design, architecture, vernacular architecture. My final year thesis was actually architecture for cyclone-prone areas in India. And so I think these words that we use so frequently now, resiliency, sustainability, I think were part and parcel of the conversation. I just didn't know this is what they were called. And so I think with undergraduate degree in architecture, a graduate degree focused on sustainable design, that probably laid a little bit of a foundation to a career in sustainability.
Thank you for that. Now, I always want to know that origin story. So let's talk about your timeline. So you get your master's degree in Pittsburgh, and I think you moved to Washington, D.C., where you still are today, and maybe got into architecture. So tell us about after the master's, that part of your career.
Sure. Can I go back for 1 second?
Of course.
So this is way back then when I was completing my undergraduate degree, and like in a month or so, I think I was going to move to the States. And folks who may not be familiar, Hyderabad is there's 2 seasons in Hyderabad, hot and hotter. And to move from there to Pittsburgh, I had never worn a sweater before that. I owned maybe one sweater. And so to move to Pittsburgh and, have to layer and wear, winter wear was just, I think, equally as much a learning experience as the graduate program we were in.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. It's not just the culture change, but it's the weather. It's like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? So Washington, D.C. is known for some winters and some snow. But I guess that's where you moved to next, right? So tell us about that in architecture, then technical, and when did you first get into even LEED? So tell us about that.
That's right. So I did take a LEED course in as a part of the electives at Carnegie Mellon. Several buildings on campus were certified to LEED, so we were very exposed to what it means in academic terms and in real life terms. And actually, before coming to the States, I had also visited. Hyderabad has the first LEED Platinum building outside of the States. Way back in the early 2000s. So that was definitely one of the buildings I'd visited before. So, I had a preliminary sense of the certification, the framework, and what it means. So after graduate school at Carnegie Mellon, I moved to Washington, D.C. to start a job with RTKL Associates, now Callison RTKL. And it was a architecture design role. And it was very exciting because the group that I was with, it was the commercial international design group. And so we focused on a lot of the fun stuff that goes into architecture, concept design to design development. And we were looking at projects across the world, Korea, India, and everywhere else. So that was my first introduction and opportunity in Washington, D.C.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you got that exposure to LEED, and then you end up working at the U.S. Green Building Council. So tell us kind of how did that come to be? And as I knew you then, and looking at your LinkedIn profile now, you didn't just help on the technical side of a normal LEED project. We're talking some of the new advanced ways to apply LEED and LEED for cities and LEED Zero. And so somehow you got tapped to do, okay, let's use LEED in other creative ways. So how did that come to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So while I was an architectural designer at RTKL, we had also begun to create green teams at RTKL, which would design and accelerate the path of an architecture design firm to progress towards designing green buildings and certifying green buildings, which included LEED. From there, I moved to a sustainability consulting firm called AtSite. And AtSite was really at the cutting edge of real-time data collection and analysis. And it was really there that it triggered the notion of how architecture can look forward with data and technology. And so what I learned during that opportunity is, how we can't silo the process between design and construction and then operations. It can't be a bridge. It has to be a continuous path forward. And, data and sensors and technology can help us do that. So with that, with both those experiences in me, design, operations, and data, it was at that time when the U.S. Green Building Council was looking to create a software platform, which is now known as ARC, and look at ways where LEED can move from, perhaps a prescriptive process to a performance process. And I was very excited to be a part of that endeavor.
What a great transition. I know under leadership at the time, it was moving towards performance-based, and that is a very important part of the green building movement. So let's talk a little bit about those that don't know. Just give us a little snippet. ARC, right? A lot of the listeners to the podcast are LEED professionals. They've hopefully been able to work on LEED projects. They've seen well and fit well in healthy buildings. But could you just summarize the ARC platform and really what kind of building should use that if you were to sum it up?
All buildings.
All buildings.
Every building should use it. I think about it like a health checkup, right? So every human being, we might feel we're healthy and we might do the best things we think work in our benefit. But unless you have a doctor check you out on it, you're just assuming the best. And so, think of ARC like a weighing scale. Unless you get on the weighing scale, you don't know how much you weigh and how much you should weigh. So it's a data-driven platform. It's free, and it helps you understand where your building's performance is compared to other buildings around the world.
That's fantastic. My green building consulting firm, SIG, we have a lot of buildings in ARC. It's a way not just to benchmark and set goals, but also even recertify your LEED for existing building projects, especially. It's a new performance-based path, not just your certification path. So let's talk about today in this role you're in at Howard Hughes Corporation. Tell us about the company. I think you've been there coming up on a year. So what do we need to know about your company and what you're doing day to day?
Sure. So at the Howard Hughes Corporation, I lead sustainability strategy across the portfolio. The Howard Hughes Corporation is known for its master planned communities. We are the largest developer of master planned communities across the U.S. And really, when we're talking about master planned communities, it's such an opportunity because it's an ecosystem that you're building. You're essentially building a new city. So, for example, we recently acquired 37,000 acres just outside Phoenix, Arizona. And that's going to be 100,000 new homes over, several years. And that's such a tremendous opportunity, right? Like, it's not just about design professionals, but how do we get residents involved? How do we transfer the knowledge that goes into building a really high performance home, office, hotel, etc., to the people who are using it? So that has been a passion of mine for a while, and I feel like now in this job, I have a direct communication path with folks who use the buildings we so beautifully design and operate. And I'm really looking forward to it.
That's fantastic. You're right. Just when we think we have some sizable projects, 37,000 acres, just the future of a chunk of an entire state here in the great United States. That's amazing. So I'm really happy for you. And I know this is an important role for you. So let's look at some highlights. If you look back, what are some things you're really proud of?
I think I'm proud of keeping an open mind and exploring. I think my career feels a bit tangential from design to operations to certifications to ESG, but I think it all comes together, and I'm really proud of the fact that I have a tribe of people like you and everyone who's listening on the call who I can rely on and exchange very candid notes and say, hey, I'm challenged here. What did you do in a similar situation? So I think for any green building professional, having that network of a very honest and transparent conversation is key. And I'm very glad to have that peer group.
Absolutely. Are there any projects, though, that you were able to work on that really stand out?
Wow. I think
hard to pick one or two, but they don't even have to be your favorites or the biggest. Just this one was meaningful. But it just popped in my head, Charlie. What are one or two that stand out?
Yeah, I think if I break that maybe into two different answers, the first one is going to be, while working on ARC, I had an opportunity to work with many high school students who wanted to understand what architecture was, what building technology was, and how to make their schools better. And that was just thrilling on multiple fronts. I could speak to third graders and I could speak to 12th graders, and everyone wanted to make the world a better place. So that definitely brought a smile to my face back then, and even right now when I'm telling you this story. I think a second example would probably be learning to scale green building movement or accelerate green building movement from individual buildings to communities to cities. Whether it's my current role at a master planned community level or my previous role at US Green Building Council with the development of LEED for cities. I think the idea that we are ready and we can accelerate the sustainability movement to a large scale has always been exciting.
That's great. No, thank you for connecting there on some projects with the high school students, the influence you have. I know you've got several credentials and you're also a LEED fellow. So congratulations on that high honor. What did that mean for you?
It was so special. I've recently received this honor, it was just last year. And I think it definitely brings a smile to my face. And I would say that looking in completing the information that's required in the application process, you look back at your own work and career and the friends and tribe that you've developed along the way. And all of that is so encouraging and you want to do more. And so I was very excited by that.
Well, congratulations. So let's come back to today and kind of your day-to-day. So you've got these master plan communities, big projects, maybe even some influence on your companies, corporate sustainability and ESG. So just give us a peek into someone with your title at this kind of company. How do you go back and forth between assignments?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the Howard Hughes Corporation, we're about 10 years old. We were a part of different broader companies, but as HHC or the Howard Hughes Corporation, we're about 10 years old. We, about 4 years back, started on a roadmap to disclosing ESG or our environmental social governance metrics. And last year was the year where we where Howard Hughes hired me as their first VP of sustainability. And so I think why I share this is I think we're seeing a similar transition across the board, across multiple countries, companies across the world. And so really what it means is taking in my mind, taking the problem solving, solution driven skills that I was taught in architecture school and applying them towards ESG principles. And so on a daily basis, it could be anything from sustainability in development projects, including LEED certification, It could be sustainability in operational assets, which are data-driven, data collection, data analysis. And at the end of the day, how does it all come together, not just environmentally, but socially as well? How are we looking to be inclusive across our communities, from our residents to our vendors and the entire supply chain?
Busy, and that's very important work. And I love the social side too. Clearly, you're not just building communities. You want to know where else you have impact. And it's such an important part of ESG is the S part too. So thank you for taking us there. Let's talk about the future. I love to ask this next question. What's next? What are you maybe reading up on, or what's trending, or what's coming at us? What's around the corner in this green building movement?
Acceleration. We just have to do more, and we have to do it faster. I don't think we don't necessarily need a new silver bullet. We just need to, use all the bullets we have and do it faster. So I think in my mind, I'm always looking to have the conversation about, can data help us move faster? How can we deliver at the intersection of science and technology? And, what can we do? What have we learned that can be applied to where we're going next? So I think at the end of the day, it's really acceleration.
Acceleration. Okay, wow. We've got the tools, we've got the bullets, we've got the data, use it. We've got healthy buildings. So let's talk about that for a minute. How is that influencing some things now, right? We've got green buildings, we've got our duty. What do we need to do to make sure we're saving energy, saving water, less impact on the environment? But over here on the healthy building side, are you seeing it affect some homes and some buildings you're working on? What are your thoughts there?
I think before we get into the technical aspect of it, probably education and awareness is equally important. I think what we do as green building professionals is deeply technical and more so invisible. So it's very hard to explain what is being done, why is it important, and the magical effects it has. At the end of the day, it feels like you're saying, just believe me, this is what can happen. But I think we need to move from that to a more understandable version of what we do. And so I think when it comes, and the reason I say that is, even with LEED, there's so many health and wellness components in everything that goes into it, just right from the integration across the environmental aspects to the testing of spaces before we move in, and overall a healthy building. I think where we can do better is talk about what does that mean? What is a healthy building in very simple terms, and just say it more often. I think sometimes we tend to talk about it, within our groups or within technical publications, and it's not as common practice as we all would like it to be.
Well said. Okay. A lot of education, talk the same language. What are the options? It's not always about getting a plaque. It's just to make sure we understand it more.
Yeah. And maybe talking about what that plaque means, right? It's not... yes, it is a design and construction or operation achievement, but what does that mean for me as a person in the building? I think that's equally important.
That's good. That's really good. Okay. Let's start talking about you a little bit more, and some rapid fire questions, if you will. Gautami, what are you best at? What's something that someone might say, you're really good at that?
Smiling.
That's fantastic. Some people are so serious in their day-to-day life. They don't smile enough. And while this is an audio podcast, listeners, trust me, I see a great smile and some good energy here. So that's fantastic. I love it. Does that lead to encouragement for those around you? I mean, what does that lead to? Just bringing some joy to people?
You said rapid fire, and that was the first word that came to me.
Okay, now I'll follow up.
No. I can get into it. I think green building professionals are intrinsically optimistic, positive people. And I think that's what you need when you're talking about green buildings, because essentially you're persuading someone to do something all the time. Like that's just the job all the time. And so I think when you come with a personality that's open to hearing the other side of the story, which you will often, I think there needs to be a little bit of understanding of where the other person is coming from. What are the trigger points? How do you communicate green building benefits to them? And at the end of the day, convince them that's the path forward. So I think a smile is just one option, but any sort of personality trait that helps with that persuasion conversation is really beneficial in this career.
That is a gift. That's fantastic. Thank you. Do you have any good habits or routines or rituals?
Oh, no, this is I think the only habit that I have now in my very adult life is probably unwinding by cooking. I like the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. Really, puts me into a very calm state of mind. So I've always enjoyed cooking, and I do that a lot. Through the pandemic, I've also taken on coloring by numbers. I don't know if anyone's done that before, but it's essentially, there's a color and there's a number on the canvas and you color it, and it's a very soothing process. So I think anything that helps you go from the up and down to a steady pace has probably become some part of my ritual, consciously or unconsciously.
Those are great. Thank you for sharing. With the cooking, is there a certain cuisine you prefer to cook, or no, just try new recipes, try new things?
I think for a calming state of mind, it's primarily South Indian cooking. Sure. That's what I grew up with. That's what I know best. But I think when we eat out or go out, we rarely eat Indian food. It's almost always something else. And, I think if this podcast was during non-pandemic years, I would probably talk about traveling too, because it's definitely that fuels my soul. And unfortunately, that's not happened in some time.
Well, keep up the cooking and the color by numbers. And it's good to kind of peek into a high performance professional like you and what brings balance. So thank you for sharing. But that's a good segue for my next question is bucket list. So I ask all my podcast guests, what's on the bucket list? Is there any adventure or travel, or do you want to write a book? So as things ease, where you can get back out there in the world a little safer, where else might you want to go, or some adventures, experiences you want to have? What's on the bucket list?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a bucket list. I feel like a bucket list shouldn't change. And I hope through the conversation I've shown that that's probably the least. I think I'd love to be in a world where we're all free to travel, meet, and see each other, and that will lead to going back to a travel schedule that I so thoroughly enjoy. And I think when it comes to traveling, because of my affinity to India, I never go east of India. I just all my planes land in India and stay there. So I'd love to travel further east, maybe Angkor Wat or Japan. Let's see when that happens.
Okay. It's time to go a little further east there. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's really good. How about books? Do you like to maybe listen to some audiobooks or hold a book in your hands? Or, some of my guests read more publications and articles, but just when it comes to books, how do you like to consume information? And is there a book you'd recommend?
That's a great question, Charlie. I think there was a time when I would read profusely, but I think in the last several years, it's really changed. I think the only books I have right now are sort of coloring books and are books that I sketch or draw in. So it's more, I think, artistically inclined than reading, if I may say so.
Yeah, and I don't know, you may be like me. I prefer nonfiction. My wife is all about fiction. And so at a certain point, there's just not enough room. I need to kind of give it a little time before I take more nonfiction in. So maybe it's a little bit of that. But if there were a book you'd recommend, though, is there one we can throw out here to our listeners?
Whatever fuels your soul. I think
it sounds like just stick with your passion and what fuels you. I know sometimes we might read books like Drawdown, or there's a new one from Paul Hawkins' team on regeneration, and just, you're right. There's a lot of good books out there. They say there's a book in each one of us, so maybe one day you'll write a book too. Maybe.
I hear you, Charlie. I think my approach to reading is slightly different, where I want that activity to turn off my green building world. And so whether it's sketching, coloring, anything related to art, really helps me turn on and turn off. So that's how I've been looking at books, at least for the last 5 to 7 years.
I see. No, that's great. That. It's like, no, when I go here, I can turn this off. Thanks for sharing that. That's a best practice. That's a pro tip. 2 final questions here. I'm really enjoying our conversation. Is there anything you wish you'd have known earlier in your career? Any career advice?
I wish I had known how patient one needs to be in the green building industry. I falsely assumed that more people are green inclined than I got to know in reality. And I think there are shades of green, which I wish I knew before. Everyone's not at the same stage and may not ever be at the same tone of green as you. And so either you work at it or you offer the tools and let them work at it. So I wish I knew there were shades of green when I was very young and knew how to identify which shade of green the other person was.
Wow. I've been doing this a while. I've not heard it said like that. That was really eloquent. Just the tones of green, the shades of green, and people are different shades of green in this journey. So I really appreciate that. You're right. That's fantastic advice. You can't be too overpowering if you're trying to just show someone, teach someone and influence them. So, all right. So last question. Let's say someone's listening to this podcast. While you and I have been doing this a long time, let's say they're just now jumping into the green building movement. Do you have any words of encouragement for them?
Keep at it. I'll also say that almost always, someone who's interested in the green building industry has probably already done something green, is already doing something green, or has a very unique idea. So please think about it as an incremental process. You're not starting from a scratch. If you've thought about this, you're already doing something. You might not know, how to identify it or give it a specific word that's used in the industry. But again, keep at it. It's an ever-changing world. There's so much to learn and so much more to do. So stay curious and definitely keep at it.
Well, that's fantastic advice to all of our listeners. Make sure you connect with Gautami on LinkedIn and check out the Howard Hughes Corporation. Thanks for spending some time on the podcast. I really enjoyed getting to hear your story. We've had some laughter and you really had some good tips. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.